I can't hear anything.
Here we go. I think, Herb, you can hear me now. Thank
Yes,
you.
I can.
And so we'll catch up with Herb. He's got a haircut, it looks like.
What?
And so it looks like you got a haircut, but I'll get
I
back to
got
you
a
in a second.
it's
Me
my
too. I got a
once
haircut.
every 5
Hey, this is
years.
Peggy's Place on KGUA in Wallala, 88.3 FM. Hi to Erica and your husband this morning. They're listening. And all the other listeners, I hope our friends down at the campground, Michael and Addie, are listening as well. So just a couple of short announcements. Number one, to let you know that if you're not listening to us on that quaint old-fashioned thing with the dials called a radio, we're at 88.3, but you might be listening to us on the stream at kgua.org, where you can download our radio. Oh no, Air Pocket app, take us anywhere. Oh yeah, and that means I got a shout out to Scott and Tree, who are somewhere, maybe in Colorado, listening to us. We're on the TuneIn app and radio.garden. So we're all over the place. You can catch us wherever you are. So thank you for listening. And little shout out to Coast Community Library. Julia Lark, our wonderful librarian over there, has a nice picture of herself that says she got vaxxed so that she could open up the library. And thank you, Julia, for all of that. And they are part of the Orange Tier. They're open Monday through Friday, 1 to 5, 50% capacity. That means about 24 people at a time. There are curbside continued. You can get books, call them if you want to do that at 882-3114. And there's still limited seating, including computer usage, but the computers are back in use, copiers and printers and masks and social distancing. So I don't know about your community, but our community loves our library, our Coast Community Library. So we want to give a big shout out to them this morning. I also want to show you this cover page. Very important cover page of the Bohemian. This is a picture of Teresa Harlan. And Teresa Harlan is on the board of directors of the Native Media Resource Center, which runs and operates KGUA. She is fighting for what remains of her mother's community down in Point Reyes. So this is the Bohemian, an excellent, excellent article. Pick it up. The writer Peter Byrne, an amazing journalist, very good story. And Teresa, and of course, some of her family and supporters will be with us on the air sometime soon. She also testified about 2 weeks ago at the Coastal Commission to save the Thule elk from being slaughtered down at Point Reyes. And the Coastal Commission was split 5-4 to kill the Thule elk and save the cattle. Save the cattle. So we support her efforts, what she's doing, and of course, fighting for the remaining history of the Coast Miwok down at Point Reyes, because her mother's family was raised in what's known commonly as, I think it's Laird's Point or Laird's Launch on the western, well, in Tomales Bay. And there's a little bit, some remnants of her family home there, and she wants those to survive. And she's fighting this lonely fight. Let's not let her be lonely, but we'll be talking to her more in the future. I think that's all I've got for this morning. So let's welcome the one and only Mr. Herb Kohl. How you doing?
Mezza, mezza.
Mezza. I know what you mean. I mean, Herb, I got to just get this off my chest because, I support strong people, but strong women, principled women, and a strong, one of those women is under attack. And I I mean, she's already been ousted, but who knew I'd be fighting for Liz Cheney or any Cheney, It's like, what's happened to this world?
And-
Anyway, I
And
don't know if you're feeling that.
well, it's amazing that she's been willing to be open in opposition to Trump. She's been unambiguous, and I have to respect her for that. I don't agree with her on almost anything
Right.
in terms of politics and morals and all, but she's standing up in a good, proper, democratic way. And it scares the hell out of me that the Republicans are becoming a right wing, fascist dominated party with no will and with a mentality of obedience. It just seems so unlikely, even in the worst of times in our democracy. I don't remember when one of the two major parties had no will anymore, had no, and it doesn't even have an ideology. And it has certainly no moral principle. And so what's left that is in opposition is nihilistic. It's dangerous in every level you can imagine. It's violent, unambiguously. So,
And proudly so.
and
That's
proudly so.
terrifying. Yeah.
So, I had a very funny feeling. I had a visit yesterday from a former boss of mine when I worked for George Soros's foundation. And he's he cut his teeth as a ACLU person. And I remember the march in Skokie in when the Nazi Party decided to march through Skokie, and ACLU was its main defender. So all the liberal Democrats were defending the rights of the Nazis to walk through a community that had an exceptional number of Holocaust survivors living in it, in the name of democracy. Then I think of Charlottesville, and it was a similar march, but the moral tone and the nature of it it is not something that should have been protected and nurtured in the name of free speech. It was in the name of destruction. So there's this contradiction between how much is appropriate in terms of expression and how much has to be reined in if it is directly provoking violence. If it's a call for violence, that doesn't seem to me a question of free speech, but a question of provocation. What?
Go ahead.
But what is even more deeply disturbing right now to me is the bombing of Gaza by the Israelis. And as a Jew myself, it has an immediate effect on me because, in a sense, when Israel does it on the national level, it's doing it in my name as a Jew, whereas it's certainly not doing it in my name. I'm completely opposed to Netanyahu and to the apartheid philosophy of the current Israeli government, but it's dividing families, it's dividing friendships within the Jewish community. And it's a very, very challenging moment, especially since what I've heard some Jews say is maybe this will be the final solution for the Palestinians. And for those of you who are watching, don't know what final solution meant was Hitler's description of what his intention was to eliminate totally and unambiguously the Jewish community in Europe. So I hesitate to call all of my relatives because I know some of them and I would get into some very serious conflict, not polite conflict, real. This is a level of it's a moral conflict. Where
I'm
do
gonna
you, yes,
I'm going to stop you right there for a second because you've said a lot of things, and I also forgot to identify who you are, just to qualify you for listeners who don't know who Herb Kohl is.
okay,
He's an educator and author of 35 books. He's rooted in the original civil rights movement, associated with the original Highlander Center, which he then tried to create an offshoot here on the West Coast. Maybe we'll get to that a little bit later today. But what you're saying about not only Israel and that divide, and I have to say, as a Native American, I can completely identify with the Palestinians. I have a good friend who is Palestinian, and when her father was a boy, he came home. Her father's now dead, but when he came home one day, and their whole family had been moved out of their house, and these strangers were living in it. That is not unlike what happened here and has continued to happen. Now, obviously, there's all kinds of the situations are not equally ideal in any way. There's a lot of things, but the fact that it's still happening is just a terrible thing.
yes,
The bombing, while we have missing, murdered Indigenous people, thousands of them in this nation, and we have this same great divide that you're talking about here. We might not be able to call relatives in Montana or New Mexico or New York or somewhere because we can't have a discussion about what's going on here because there's no middle ground anymore. That it's a very similar thing. So this kind of this hatefulness that has come back out into the open, it's always been there, but then dividing us. And you remind me of I was watching MSNBC the other night. I can't remember which show it was, but John Meacham and the great historian and this young, oh gosh, I can't remember her name. It's three names. She's a poet and a historian, and they're both from oh God, what university is that back east? But the point that they were both making is that not since pre-Civil War has this nation been this divided and had this kind of, as you also mentioned in your opening statement, about how divided we are, how we can't talk to each other, the other side's, just this the fact that so many, what is it statistic, 40% of the people believe in a lot of this crazy stuff, not just don't disagree with you, they believe in crazy things.
yes.
So we're in this very, I think, scary time.
Yes, I completely agree. And it's hard to know where the eruptions are going to be that provoke large scale violent reactions because there are so many potential points of provocation right now. People seem to, everybody's skin is raw, that is so close to aching, so close to striking out. And part of it is, of course, Trump, but I think the deepest part of it is absolute transformation of the United States into a nation of color, basically. We are becoming more and more a nation of people who are not white in heritage. And this has led to a reaction amongst even the calmest of conservative and moderates that is irrational in the sense that they don't even know they had it in them until provoked. I saw this happen a while back with my in-laws when my wife was alive, and I said some things, and these are very genteel Protestant Midwesterners, and all of a sudden it was you and your kind in terms of what I was saying. Me and my kind. It's almost as if they had this vision of the enemy out there lurking. And I think that's why it's impossible to have any civil dialogue. If, for example, the Republican Congress people think that Biden's a demon, which they do, they've said it, how can you have commerce? There's one of my students years and years ago wrote a fable, and it was about people fighting and fighting, and one of the parts of the assignment was to write a conclusion. He said the conclusion to his fable was can't find no ending. And I feel that way. I don't know how this is going to resolve itself, except it means being stronger, being clearer about my own moral vision, about the visions of the people I work with and love, and of standing up explicitly for the principles that principles of decency and humanity that have driven much of this country. But much of this country has had no decency from its very beginning. So, in a sense, the underlying disease has metastasized, and it's oozing out everywhere. It's not as if we're looking to go back to a time when the US was decent and moral. There never was such a time. And therefore, the crucial job of educators, from my point of view, is to create a decent future and to develop a vision of a decent future, because we have to understand the past, but we certainly do not want to reproduce it in any shape or form. So we have a big task ahead of us. And at 83 and a half, I don't think I'm going to live to see the end of this struggle. On the other hand, I want to go out struggling.
Well, I'm sure you are. I can, I echo all of those sentiments, and it is this puzzle. How are, but I think we still have that optimistic feeling somewhere in us, or we wouldn't keep fighting. I mean, we do have to keep what so many of us say fighting, but that doesn't mean that we want to tear each other apart. That doesn't mean we want to shout in each other's faces. It means we want a principled America. And you're right, we've never had it. We have had a lot of people with principles in power, sometimes on both sides. I have to say that history will show that up to now, the Republicans have done better things for Native Americans than the Democrats did.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that I'm going to suddenly become a Republican or jump over, to defend the right of the craziness of the crazy wing of the Republican Party that's happening now. But there's so many things that we could be, and call us idealist as humans. And yes, education is a huge part of it. I think John Meacham, the historian, echoed something similar to what you just said, in that this myth about America the Great, it was never America the Great. And all the mythology that is taught in school that, doesn't have any place anymore. But just because you want to replace that, in my opinion, those myths with some real history, let me, hold up this newspaper again, the 10,000-year history of the indigenous people in Point Reyes. That doesn't mean that we want to erase everybody else's history. That means we want to know about that, because there's things to learn from all of those histories.
The other thing I see it is on the other face of all this discontent is an enormous amount of creative conjunctions of young artists and young activists with each other across boundaries, and despite the pandemic, using the media and doing all kinds of things, so that there is an incipient creativity and decency that is part of our culture. I see my son and his wife, who is Japanese, working with an African American at Colorado College and a trans guy in Cincinnati to compose multicultural theater, multigender works for video and for live theater. I see all kinds of interesting cross-generational redefinition of one's own art. That's about, to me, one of the fascinating things. I've been writing an autobiography for 4 or 5 years, and I've had some friends read some of the texts, and they've said to me, Herb, you really don't seem to understand the role of the women in your family. And your narrative shows it. So what I said was, show me that, teach me that. And one of my cousins, who is both a feminist and a family historian, says, Herb, look, here you are saying this about my mother, but here is who my mother was and what she contributed to you as you were growing up. So I'm reconstructing my own family narrative and welcoming it as I'm creating the narrative of my own life. So a lot of these creative re-examination of narrative structures go part and parcel with creation, with the development of art forms, with the capacity to communicate across boundaries. I feel that the reconstruction of narrative, the discovery of an appropriate contemporary narrative voice is a challenge to all of us that we really must face. And it's one of the things we have to do with the quote other. In other words, we have to together say, do we have a reconception of our narrative, but also can we collaborate on the creation of a common narrative, because we're going to have, one way or another, a common future. And it's an enormous challenge, but it's very exciting. It's very real in that when you start examining the things that you've done, that you've said, that you believed, the most liberal and the most radical ones are also in need of examination in the light of a reconstruction of the narrative of our culture, our society, and hopefully of the globe. It's a very exciting time to be alive, so that in a sense, the depression and the anger and all is balanced by all the romantic dreams of what they used to call a splendid city on the hill. There's this wonderful essay by Pablo Neruda called it was his Nobel Prize acceptance speech about a splendid city on the hill where we want to live. There is no such city now. But where do we want to live? How do we want to live? Those are questions we should be talking about all the time and conceiving all the time and examining everywhere. I find it intriguing that the same questions are being asked by professional athletes of their lives and their roles, of theater people, of painters, of regular activists, and of small business people. Corporate capitalist greed is inexcusable, and we have to be articulate about not duplicating the greed of our predecessors.
I'm going to again stop you there, because everything you just said is I am hearing from so many places.
Yes.
And I find this a really wonderful phenomenon. I don't know if partly it's because of the year of COVID, of our isolation, and our now I sort of humans now are coming into our own spring again, I kind of feel. But I have a friend who is a writer. He's also Jewish. He just traveled cross country as soon as he got vaxxed to see the grandson he hadn't seen. And he spent 6 weeks in and around the Beltway, Alexandria and Baltimore, and seeing his daughters and all of that. And he too has come back examining himself. Is really recognizing, as he puts it, the profiler in him, that he didn't know existed, but also seeing firsthand by driving across the United States twice now in 6 weeks, how our country taking the temperature is so, it's so unhealthy, so angry. Just the anger, as he put it, that screams out of bumper stickers, and is everywhere, and being very closeted about whether you've been vaccinated, and mask wearing is not happening across the country. So there's these dichotomies that are happening at the same time. I think there is this richness that perhaps has to do with a year of being sheltered in place. I'm not sure, but I am seeing, like you, that there's this renaissance and re-examination. But for some people, it's it's the opposite. It's the hunkering down. We've got to protect what we've got, because that fear of losing who they are, that was, in my opinion, based on a lot of lies.
But I think one thing that the pandemic may have done which is the positive one, is that the power of the pandemic is the power of nature. There's not a person who's causing the pandemic. It's a entity that is natural, that is invisible, that you cannot point to and say, they're my neighbor. In other words, we are affected by something that is both natural and metaphysical, that is invisible and visible at the same time. And it's a challenge to our very existence.
Oh,
And
yeah,
and
absolutely.
it, challenges can either make us very, very defensive or very creative, very hostile or very affectionate. And I think that we're in a great big gumbo right now, where everything's mixing around with all the spices and all the aromas. And that those of us who really, it's a very hard thing. Can you still care for the other in the midst of this kind of vitriol and hatred? Is it possible to have regard in a positive way? For example, those Republicans who just kicked Liz Cheney out. I don't have an answer for myself. I see some very ugly things in myself directed towards my attitude towards them. On the other hand, those things themselves are dysfunctional. They're not good for my health. They're not good for my sanity. They're not good for my art. They're not good for my family or my friends. So the infection of decent people by indecent people and ideas is a challenge that is a creative challenge. Can we emerge as better human beings from being challenged this way by confronting, in effect, the demons and overcoming them? And it's a challenge. Let's put it this way.
We're talking, I just have to remind people, this is KGUA in Walla 88.3 FM, Peggy's Place, and we're talking with Herb Kohl, who is struggling with his challenge, as so many of us are struggling with that challenge of, yes, we're, in a forced evolution of humanity globally because of this, as you say, nature. It was always there. It's happening now, and it's a real thing that is not tangible in the sense that we can sit it on the table, but it can still is a real thing in affecting humans. And how we all the year of isolation, the coming out now, and along with all of the other things that are going on politically in the world and socially, economically, how do we reconcile that? How do we go forward? And is this, is it an opportunity for us, like you say, to how do we embrace that otherness, whichever side of that other we're on, because it is there. And right now, you're talking, when we talk about economy, I mean, I have to say right here at home, we're worried. There was an influx of people who have artificially inflated all the homes prices here, the service industry, the people who we need to work here, who've lived here for decades. There's no place for them.
Right.
There's no place for your children or grandchildren to be able to buy their own homes if they want to. So all of these things that are wrapped up that are making us anxious, feeling in crisis, wanting to blame you or you or you, and yet we're not talking enough about solutions. I want to step a few decades back with you this morning.
Okay, sure.
Okay, if you don't mind, because you did come from the original civil rights movement. We came back far from that. I mean, even farther, your whole family's history. But I've had this question I've wanted to ask, and kind of, and I'll tie it into today. But at one point, you had Rosa Parks out here on the West Coast.
Yes, that's right.
And what did she think of, or did you guys talk about our environment? Of course, as we were in a different era then, but there's a big difference between the South and here.
Well, first of all, it's very important to understand one thing about the story of Rosa Parks. Okay? We look on it as Rosa, the heroine who created the desegregation of the public transport in Montgomery, right? Who led a successful desegregation effort that was a triumph, right? Where did Rosa, what happened to Rosa after this, after becoming Rosa Parks in the splendid city on the hill? She got driven out of Montgomery. She got driven out of the South. She went to Detroit because her husband lost his job. It was not a story of triumph. It was a story of struggle, appreciating the struggle, but having to go to Detroit. She worked for John Conyers and ran his office in Detroit for the rest of her life. So what we have to look upon when we think of Rosa Parks and what she thought of is Rosa Parks was a woman of real depth and long-range understanding. And she understood that you're going to make some big victories, but unfortunately, sometimes the very people who create those victories are going to have to suffer some drastic changes in their lives because of it. And she did. I mean, she had to leave the South. I think the important lesson is she kept on fighting. She kept on believing. She kept on working, like with John Conyers and all. And when she came to Berkeley, is where she came. It was on the 25th anniversary of the Montgomery bus boycott. She was, with all of the changes she went through, delighted that she was at a multiracial, progressive meeting with a group of people. She said, "We have grown a bit." I think the beauty of what she was saying is, we have grown a bit, do not retrench, we have to grow some more. And that's would be my message to that going back to think about Rosa Parks and to think about my own life is, let us not retrench. Let us not retrench the gender triumphs we've had. Let us not retrench the populist changes in demographics. So what we are really involved in is consolidating where we've come from and building greater liberty on the basis of older triumphs, which means we have to acknowledge them, appreciate them, and not say just because they're not, there are some defeats. No, these are major transforming victories, but they're tiny steps on the Silk Road, you might say, tiny steps on the long road towards justice and equity. So that's the way have begun to come to see it. There are wonderful things that I've seen that have happened positively. In fact, what made Trump positive, when you think about Trump and his demons, what made them possible were the victories that we achieved. You see, if we had not achieved those victories, they could sit back and be delighted. We'd still be in the antebellum South. We'd still not have to worry about, quote, them, but they have to worry now because, in fact, we have achieved many victories. I remember a number of gay friends of mine who were coming out in the late 60s and early 70s, and some of whom suffered deeply. A couple of them, you might say, didn't make it, but they have achieved something. And there are people who are trying to retrench on those achievements, cannot be allowed to get away with that. And we have to build on it, make it. A friend of mine, Lori Mayeno, I don't know if you know her, from Berkeley. She wrote a children's book, which I recommend to everyone. It's called A Friend Like Yours or something. It's about actually her son, but it's about a kid comes to his mother and says, "Mother, we're going to have a party, a dress-up party at school." It's a boy and says, "I want to dress as a girl." Pause. Mother says, "Let's go. Let's go pick up some fabric." "I will make you a dress." And the whole thing plays out with no comment of a negative sort on anybody's part. And when you're done with the book, you realize, oh, this is transformational. It just got banned in Missouri. The book got banned because it didn't say anything. But it said, what it said was a new normal. What it showed was something very, very normal, and they got it, and it became so offensive that the legislature had to ban it. Well, but those are things that's what we have to build on, that the book didn't exist in the past. And the attitude of the parents who love the book is a bestseller.
I'm going to go you one more on that.
Okay.
They're talking about transformation in media. There is a small group of Native writers, actors, and producers who are transforming television. And we have on the Sci-Fi Channel a series called Resident Alien, which is very funny, but that's and it got renewed for a second season. It's really well worth watching. An alien who's come to Earth to get rid of all of us because, well, it's kind of obvious if you're out from another planet. But anyway, there's Indians and children, and not that we equate Indians and children together. I didn't mean that, but it's a great story and it's funny. But there's another new series called Rutherford Falls that's on Peacock. And I keep talking about this because it's transformational. And it's transformational because several of the writers are Native. They are young, they are women, they are men, and they're working with other Hollywood comedians. But the story of Rutherford Falls has several transformative things. One, you have a large Native woman who is the lead in the series. You don't see large women as leads in series. There is a non-binary person who has a major role in the series. And it's in a nutshell, it's about who owns history to a large degree, but it's about Indians, and it's contemporary. We're not talking about Indians in the past. We're not, oh, those sad people on the Trail of Tears, or those people, who died in the massacres. These are people today. There's a mythical, huge casino and all the stuff that goes on with the casino. But the lead character, she wants her own cultural museum, and she's got a little tiny room at the museum. And her best friend is a white guy who's the last of the Rutherfords, and he's trying to keep his people's history alive. It's a very funny film. Not film, it's a series on Peacock. Transformation in a mass way, without preaching, without saying, this is what we're doing. The importance of the resident alien is how he learns to be human, and who is he learning to be human from? And what is he learning? What does humanity mean? That's part of the lesson there. So it's interesting, in light of all of these transformations that are happening, and mass media has an opportunity here that it seems to be embracing. There's a third series that's going to be coming up soon. But these are young people, younger people, who are doing some amazing, amazing work for the general population, that we can all sit and, having worked with a major comedian years ago, when we can laugh together and laugh with each other and about each other together, it's one of the most transformative and educational things I've ever been involved with.
Sure. And I think what young people see is, as artists, and the artists are increasingly important in educating a disorganized public, that they can create a vision of an ordinary world that crosses all the boundaries that people are so afraid to step over, and they do it in indirect ways, absurd ways and funny ways and dramatic ways, but they are educating our emotions and our sensitivities as well as our minds. And I think it is a most welcome thing, and I am just delighted to be witness to it. And hopefully some of what I'm writing can contribute to it. I'm working on some things now. I stayed with my wife, Judy, throughout her Alzheimer's, and I've finally been able to do some reflection writing on what it's like to live with somebody who has Alzheimer's and no longer knows your name, but recognizes you. Who no longer realizes that you were married, but who is afraid you will abandon her because you belong with her. And it's very intriguing because it's, in a funny way, doing it reminds me of the work of an old friend of mine who used to live in Anchor Bay, Monique Wittig, a novelist French feminist, who wrote a series of books that were ungendered. There was no gender reference to any character in the books, whatever. No him or her or she or that, and you had to reorient yourselves towards understanding what was going on, because there were no hints other than it was what it was. There was no sense that she's doing this. It's this person who's doing this to that person. And it's transformative. Well, that's what happened with me with my wife, because I was not her husband, but I was, because she didn't have a husband, but I was, we were two people swimming in a sea of disruption. And it's been an intriguing challenge. I've hopefully I might do a reading from some of those things next time I get up the coast. I've shared them with a few people, and they find them exceptionally interesting, because if you've ever been around someone with Alzheimer's, you can't put your hand on what's going on. But if you've been with someone all your life and watched the disintegration, there is a tragic coherence to that disintegration, and a gorgeous, beautiful integration, so that the core that's left can be quite beautiful, unless it's abandoned completely. And when it's completely abandoned, it's abandoned. Anyway, so there's a lot of wonderful things to do and know, and I'm going to watch those shows.
Yes,
That's
good to laugh.
well, it's a laugh, and it's time for us all to be re-educated and re-educate ourselves, which is fun, because I love learning.
I do too, and I look forward to your reading, whether you're up here on the coast or if next month you want to read some on our time next month. But having seen some of that process a little bit, living up here and knowing you and Judy and your family a bit. Herb, we have about 5 minutes left to go. It's funny, I had this list of things, and you've gone through so many of the things on my short list in such a wonderful way, because one of the questions I was going to ask you, and you've done it and answered in so many ways, was what are you happy about? And because we can't just dwell on our angst and the things that are going on around us that are so disconcerting. We do have to find a way to enjoy the life here that we have, this gift that we have, that we're still here,
And the beauty of a good poem doesn't disappear because the world is disintegrating. And the beauty of our beautiful redwood trees don't disappear unless we make them disappear. So it's a lesson to us, but they provide enormous pleasure. I think also there's so much to laugh at. I mean, not mock in the sense of laugh at, but to laugh with, because we're still pretty funny human beings, and we still mess up all kinds of silly things in silly ways. And it's a question of looking at what's horrible and finding people who've been able to bring some laughter out of hard times and then do it ourselves. Because as we encounter all of this change and turmoil, we have to never forget that life is pretty funny being alive.
Yes.
Like one of Heidegger's question, why is there something rather than nothing? I don't know, is the answer.
Exactly. Well, I just have to remind you and the audience what a pleasure it is to be able to join you each month in these conversations. And this past weekend, uh, well, in part because it was my birthday, we began socializing again. And Susan
Wonderful.
counted up, and she said, as of now, we've seen about 12 people, and that's so exciting. And yet it's another one of those things to laugh at, isn't it?
That's right.
12 people. And we're so happy, that we've been around, different groups of people, either as, individuals or in a group, and how much our humanness needs that,
Yes.
and I've learned things that, we're not through this yet, but I didn't know that how much I needed that. I think of myself as an introvert, and I'm always fighting for my privacy, and yet was like, wow, we're getting to be around people. So isn't
Yep.
that a nice thing?
Yes, it's a wonderful thing. First time in a year that my children and my granddaughter and spouses and all could see each other's faces. We almost forgot what they looked like. I mean, the funny thing is to watch people and not see their faces. You begin to forget the complexity of expression and the portrait of the whole. And it's such a pleasure to watch a face, to see a smile or a frown or something. So I agree with you. Being social is magic, and we need to constantly take advantage of it, but not overdo it because we don't want to get tired of each other.
See, there's that other side of it.
That's right.
Everything, there's another side, and it's okay.
Well,
You
that's why the problem with capitalism is that it's a transactional way of looking at things. I give, you take, I take, you give. Dialectically speaking, everything has its opposite, and it's in the interaction of the opposites, or what Jung would call the anantodromia, the interaction of the opposites, that magic comes out and synthesis and positive things emerge. So here we are.
Here we are. That's going to be the last word out of all of that magic. What did you say comes out? Evolves. Herb Kohl, thank you so much as always. It's
My
great to
pleasure.
see your smile. I can see the smile in your eyes, and your face seems more relaxed than it did last month. So always great. Until next
My
month.
pleasure.
All right. You take care.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye,
That's right.
Peggy.
All right. And we'll be back.